Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to change the brake pads on an 06 Honda Accord. I'm going with the Duralast Gold ceramic brake pads. These are the brake pads right here. We're going to dive off in and check the brake pads just in case. I went ahead and got two rotors for the front also. So we're going to take a look at the rotors. If we need to change them, we'll go ahead and change them out. We just want to see how they look. So the process on changing the brakes on a Honda Accord is about the same as changing the brake pads out on probably 85% of every make and model of cars out there. So it shouldn't be hard to do. Even if you don't have a Honda Accord, the process should be about the same on your car. Only differences I've ever really seen changing the pads is when you go into removing the caliper. Most manufacturers have bolts back there that you can use a wrench on. Some, like GM, have Torx bit screws or Torx heads on the caliper bolt, so it's probably going to be about the only difference you have. Other than that, guys, we're going to stop the intro right here. Without further delay, let's go ahead and get into the video. Alright guys, as we get into the video, I ask that you take the time to like and subscribe to the channel if you like the content. Now we're going to look at a few tools that you'll need. You'll need a large flathead screwdriver or a C-clamp to compress the caliper. I prefer the C-clamp. You'll need PP Blaster or WD-40 to penetrate the rotor screws, a ratchet with a 12, 17, and 19 millimeter socket. It wouldn't hurt to have a 3/8 ratchet and a 1/2 inch drive ratchet, a Phillips head screwdriver, preferably with a broad tip bit, a torque wrench, and a 1/2 inch to 3/8 adapter if needed. I used an impact wrench. You don't necessarily need one. Now we'll take a look at the locations of the jack points or lift points, whatever you would like to call them, on the body. They aren't located too far behind the left front tire. They are under the left front door. Look for the lip of the body. This is the area where several pieces of sheet metal were welded at the factory. It's located in the same place on most unibody cars. On this car, the seal spoiler covers most of it. You want to avoid putting the jack or jack stand on that area so you don't damage the seal spoiler. Now we're going to loosen the lug nuts. Don't do like me, have a jack under the body with a little raised tension. Break the lug nuts loose before jacking it up and getting the wheel off the ground. If you have custom wheels or a lug nut that requires a key to remove, make sure you have the proper tools available. This car requires a lug nut key. Alright, now that all the lug nuts are broken loose, we'll go ahead and raise the car up. Now we'll place the jack stand under the car and we'll lower it down easy. Now that we have the wheel off the ground, let's go ahead and finish taking these lug nuts off so we can get the tire off and we can take a look at the brakes and the brake rotor. Looking at the brake rotor, it's not in too bad a shape. The car does wobble when you apply the brakes. Sometimes that's a sign of a warped rotor. So since we're this far deep in and we're making a video, we're going to go ahead and change the rotor out. For the sake of making a video, I'm going to jump in. I'm going to turn the car on. I'm going to turn the wheel to the left. Be easy doing this. You don't want the car to slide under the jack stand, so do it easily and do it slow. Now I'm going to take some PB Blaster and I'm going to spray the screws that are on the rotor that help line the rotor up when you put the rotor on. We're going to let that dwell while we take the caliper off. Now we're using a C-clamp to compress the caliper. We want to compress it, that way when we come back with the new brake pads, the caliper will slide on easier. This won't damage your brake system. Some people are cautious and they'll open the reservoir cap so any type of pressure will funnel out the top of the brake reservoir, but you don't have to. I've never had an issue doing it this way. You can also use a flathead screwdriver to pry in to compress the caliper. I just prefer the C-clamp better, but I wanted to show an example of that. Alright, now we're getting ready to take off the caliper. You're going to need a 12mm socket, and on this one I'm using a 3/8 ratchet. So remember, you're going opposite to you, so make sure you have the ratchet lefty-loosey, righty-tighty. Sometimes it can be confusing when you're taking off something that's opposite to you. Now that the bolts are broken loose, we're going to finish taking them out by hand. The bolts themselves are not that long. Now that we have the caliper loose, we'll go ahead and pull it out of the way. In this case, I'm going to use a bungee cord and I'm going to wrap it around the upper control arm, and I'm going to put the hooks in each side of the caliper to keep it out of the way. Now we're going to work on the caliper bracket. You'll need a 17mm socket for this, and the bracket is on pretty tight, so you may need a hammer to help persuade it, or a braking bar so you can get some leverage on it. Once you get them broken loose, you should be able to take them out with your hand. As we pull it off, you can see the brake pads are coming out with it. I didn't remove the brake pads. Now we're going to start the process to take the rotor off. We're going to put a Phillips head screwdriver into the screw, make a few taps. This will help loosen the screw up and any rust or corrosion that's formed inside. All right. So one broke pretty easy. The other one was a little stripped. So I had to go get a broader head Phillips head bit to put in there. You'll see that I put it in there. I make a few taps to help secure the bit into the head of the screw. After I did that and I made a left turn, it came out fairly easy. Just like that, screws removed and the rotor is coming off. These screws attach the rotor to the hub, in case you were wondering, to help line up. Now we're going to install the new brake rotor on. You make sure you line it up with the screw holes that are on the hub. Now we're going to reinstall the screws. I'm just sticking with the broadhead Phillips bit. I would suggest you just go ahead and use a broadhead Phillips bit from the get-go. Don't do like me, don't experiment. Just use the right thing from the get-go. Now we're going to reattach the caliper bracket. So we'll line it up and we'll hand start the bolts before we use the ratchet and the socket to tighten it down. Make sure you get them good and snug with the ratchet and the socket. Now I'll use a torque wrench to torque down the caliper bolts. The torque spec is 79.6 pounds per foot. My wrench is set at 80 pounds. Now we'll pull the guide pins out of the caliper itself. These are where the caliper bolts go into. I'm going to take them out and I'm going to add some grease onto them. So you see I got them greased up. Now I'm going to reinstall them. Make sure the plastic boot attaches back to the notch set on the guide pin. The caliper also needs to line up with the set point on the guide pins when you install the caliper back on. Now we'll install the new brake pads by sliding them into the notches on the caliper bracket. So it's fairly easy. You do it the same way you took them off. Some aftermarket pads may have parts or pieces you need to take off so you can make the pads fit on your car. These pads are made for several different vehicles. They're not made solely for the vehicle you're putting them on. Now that we have the pads on, we're going to reinstall the caliper. So we're going to take it loose from how we had it rigged up. We're going to bring it over and we're going to slide it over the brake pads, and we're going to line it up with the guide pins and the rubber boot that the guide pins are in. Since we pulled the guide pins out to grease them, we may have to turn them so the caliper can fit up to it flush. Now we're going to reinstall the caliper bolts. Hand start these. Make sure they go in right. Make sure they turn easy when you hand start them. You do not want to cross thread these. You don't want to cross thread anything on this job, but you definitely don't want to cross thread the caliper bolts. Now that we have them hand started, we're going to snug them down with the ratchet and the 12mm socket. Now we're going to torque down the caliper bolts. The torque spec is 54 pounds per foot. Now that the caliper is torqued down, we'll go ahead and get in the car and we'll straighten the wheel. Remember, do it slowly. We don't want anything to cause any movement on the jack stand. Now it's time to reinstall the tire and the wheel. So it wasn't nearly as easy to put back on as it was to take off, but there were no issues. It was just a matter of getting it lined up. Once it's lined up, I'll install a few lug nuts so we can secure it. Then I'll tighten them down. With all the lug nuts snug down, we'll go ahead and torque the lug nuts. The set point for the torque is 80 pounds per foot. Now that everything is torqued down and put back together, we'll take the jack stand out. Remember, you're going to have to jack it up a little bit to get the body off of the jack stand. Pull the jack stand out, then lower the jack down easily. Alright, and now we are finished. As I said, it's really not that hard. This is the same process across 85% of vehicles out there. That's going to be it for today, guys. I appreciate you watching. If you like the video, hit like, hit subscribe, and also leave me a comment. If there's anything you want to see a video done on, leave it in the comments. But that's all I got. Have a great day. Thanks for watching, and catch me for the next one.